Now, I know that power levels are often a topic of some serious debate among fans of shonen series, but at least as far as Bleach goes, I've always found that they made at least some semblance of sense to me, and I was always fairly happy with the way power scaled in this series. To be honest, I'm not really an expert in this field, but to me it always seemed like Kubo did a somewhat decent job of consistently improving and increasing the stakes by making the enemies stronger, while ensuring that older characters remained relevant. Captains can always keep up with Espada and Sternritter, and to me the power levels only started to balloon at the very end of the Arankar arc, with obviously the very final battle, which makes total sense, and then towards the very end of the Varvelt invasion, right at the end of the series. But if you ask me, the average fight between a captain and a Sternritter is very similar to the average fight between a captain and an Espada, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Kubo also does a decent job, in my opinion, of contextualizing Ichigo's power, his fluctuations, his increases and his decreases, and then eventually solidifying him towards the end and cementing where he stands as far as how powerful he actually is. However, there is one example of a fight in the Thousand Year Blood War arc that takes these power levels that are somewhat established and completely just demolishes them and blows the doors wide open regarding who's actually as strong as who. And I do think that a lot of this is down to spectacle. I think this fight in particular was designed to be very spectacular, to essentially accommodate the character involved. One of these characters is a showman, he is a superstar, and therefore I think the fight is supposed to be kind of insane, but of course that fight is Renji versus Masked Masculine. In this video I want to discuss this particular fight and how the power levels seem to just get completely demolished in this battle, how Renji seems to be so insanely powerful when you look at how powerful Master Masculine must end up, and I want to kind of look at maybe how Mask's superstar ability actually works, or at least give an opinion and an alternative opinion as to how it can work, and just how powerful Renji might actually be by the end of this fight. When I do my videos, I don't normally have a script or anything, but for this one I had to create some notes regarding the amount of times James actually cheers for Mask, and I have to say, with the amount of pluses on here, it looks like a maths sheet, but hopefully we can actually come up with some kind of an answer in this video as to how powerful Renji actually was and how Mask's ability actually works, and whether we should actually take this fight at face value or if it really is just for spectacle's sake. Before we begin, however, if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, I'd really appreciate the support. Make sure to hit that button now if you love Bleach videos, because you are in the perfect place to get them every single week. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up as well if you enjoyed this discussion, because it really helps with exposure on YouTube to try and get more people to see it than ever before. And also, don't forget as well to hit the notification bell, and you'll keep getting my videos as they appear in your sub box every single week. So in the first invasion, after Byakuya has been pummeled to near death by Asnot with his own Bankai, Renji attempts to essentially save his captain's life and attack Az, but he's blindsided by Masked Masculine, who kicks him halfway across the Soul Society and rips Zabimaru in half. That's a setup for a grudge match if I've ever seen one, and Kubo does deliver on that by having Renji take on Master Masculine after he returns from the Royal Realm, apparently considerably stronger. But that's not how the fight actually begins. Mask actually takes on a couple of people before he takes on Renji. So from the very beginning, from about 560 onwards, let's look at this fight, how it progresses, and just how powerful Master Masculine actually becomes. If you've seen my top 10 Sternritters video, you'll see that I ranked Master Masculine as the 10th strongest Sternritter of the lot of them, and I stand by that. His power is incredibly vague. He notes that he is S, the superstar, and that his ability is simply described as the cheers of his fans give him strength. There's no kind of quantifier to that, it's literally that. The cheers of Mask's fans make him more powerful. We don't know by how much, and we can only try and ascertain that through the research I've done in this video. As for James, who's the person who cheers Mask on, I don't think he's a real person. I think he is a personification of the superstar itself. I think he probably just appears when Mask activates his Shrift, and he's not really living, which I think Kubo does try and emphasize by how strange and eldritch James actually becomes as the fight progresses. There are some people who speculate that James is the real Sternritter. I don't think so. I think Master Masculine perhaps is actually called James, and that's why he calls this guy James. It's like a a personification of himself in a way. You know, it's like an inner thing that kind of comes out and cheers himself on, like he's, you know, boosting his own strength in some kind of weird meta way. There's no way of knowing for sure, but I think Master Masculine probably was the actual Sternritter. But now we need to get into the actual fight and see just how strong this guy gets. As we're not shown James cheering Mask at any point before the first time we find out about this ability, I think it's reasonable to believe that there are no times he gets cheered on prior to the first time we find out about it. So Mask initially appears on the battlefield confronting Hisagi, Ikkaku, and Yumichika, and we know at least two of these guys are captain level, being Hisagi and Ikkaku. As far as we're concerned, Master Masculine is currently in base form, and we see that he takes down all three of them very easily, without barely even taking a scratch. However, after Kensei and Rose arrive on the battlefield and Kensei beats up Mask a little bit, Hisagi does reveal that he knows that James is the one who boosts Mask's power, implying that James has cheered at least once before Kensei and Rose arrived. So, to dial it back a bit, basically, Mask takes on Hisagi, Ikkaku, and Yumichika, and at some point during that fight, James cheers for him at least once. And I think we can probably assume it probably is just the once, just because that's all Hisagi mentions. So at that point, because Mask has so easily destroyed these three characters, he is clearly at least captain level by this point, after one cheer from James. And I want to try and represent Mask's power level by having James appear in the bottom corner. So at this point, we're at one cheer from James, and Mask has already decimated these three characters, knocking all of them out cold. And yet, in this form, he's completely decimated by Bankai Kensei. And actually, that makes sense, to me at least anyway. Kensei was already a captain and a Vizard captain at that, and Bankai should roughly put him 5 to 10 times stronger than he was initially. If we believe that Master Masculine is roughly captain level for having taken down those three guys, then it makes sense that a Bankai captain would beat him up. We now get the second cheer from James, and this is when Kensei and Rose realise that they have to deal with James first, or else Mask is going to become exponentially stronger. The second cheer from James, when Mask reveals that his power is the Superstar, seems to put him, at least in my opinion, on a level equal to that of Bankai Kensei, and presumably Bankai Rose, but since Bankai Kensei is the physical fighter here, it's definitely easier to gauge against. And Mask is able to knock Kensei around pretty handily, but also Kensei seems to be able to turn the fight back into his favour. We see that although Kensei gets knocked around a bit, he is eventually able to fight back against Mask, and he lands a punch on Mask, changing the way his Bankai works, presumably to inflict more punches into Mask, as that's how his Bankai works. When he punches someone, when it connects to them, it just simply pummels them over and over and over with bursts of energy as though they were being punched continuously. And what it looks like here is that Kensei takes a serious beating, but then he punches Mask, and Mask begins to scream as though he is getting overpowered. Kensei says something like, "Don't get ahead of yourself." Mask sort of blocks the attack, but Mask is like, "Ah," like he's freaking out, like it's too much for him, at which point James cheers for the third time. Once James has cheered for the third time, giving Mask a +3, Mask absolutely decimates Bankai Kensei. Like, there is just no trouble here whatsoever. He completely crushes this guy. And then the fight with Bankai Rose is not necessarily as relevant, I don't think, because Bankai Rose fights very differently to Kensei. He kills James and then attacks Mask using his illusions, but Mask defeats Rose because Rose is an idiot. It's not really a power level thing. It's more Rose just gives the game away as far as how his Bankai works, and Mask is able to take him down with a Star Flash. It's at this point that Renji arrives on the battlefield, having had his training up in the Royal Realm, and now we can assume he is considerably more powerful. However, if Mask's power actually stacks on top of itself, at this point, Mask is already far above a Bankai captain, which means that Renji must have reached extreme levels. What's crazy here is that when Renji and Rukia actually arrive on the battlefield, they both seem to believe pretty confidently that Renji can handle Master Masculine no trouble whatsoever. And it's this almost kind of cockiness and arrogance that makes you think that they know the extent of their power. It's at this point we get the fourth cheer from James. However, this one is difficult to discern exactly what it does. Does it actually power Mask up like the other ones, or is it only used to repair his eardrums? If you ask me, this one is only used to heal Mask as opposed to actually power him up, because he's still expecting Renji to be about the same level as Bankai Kensei. But Renji utterly demolishes Mask, and he is only in Shikai as well at this point, but he completely crushes him. Now, Renji already, prior to going to the Royal Realm, was probably one of, if not the strongest of the vice captains, up there with the likes of Sasakibe and Hisagi. And now Renji is completely demolishing the same person who demolished Bankai Kensei. There's a lot of demolishing going on in this fight. And Renji at this point must be an obscene level of strength. And now this is when things get really, really weird. Basically, Renji realises that James can still cheer Mask on even after Rose has cut him to pieces, so Renji does the same thing, and he chops James up into tiny little pieces. But James survives. As I said before, he is not a human so much as he is the embodiment of the superstar itself. And as long as Mask breathes, I don't believe James is necessarily going anywhere until a little bit later on in the fight anyway. What we need to work out here, however, is now that James is cheering Mask on from multiple points, there's now loads of James being born from all the different parts of his body that have been cut up. Do each of these James count as a +1 on their own as individuals, or do they all kind of count as one collective +1? If we assume they all count as just one James, still this is the 5th cheer that Master Masculine has got. However, if we all count each sort of individual mouth as a +1 for Mask, he's now on about +10 or 11, which is completely absurd. I actually think it's the latter, as crazy as that sounds, and I think that's how Mask manages to transform into an unknown form. I don't know what this thing is. It's not a Volstendig, as that comes later. This appears to just be some kind of extension of the superstar, but Mask himself says that it is a power-up, and it does make him stronger. It's difficult to say how much stronger it makes him, but he seems confident now that he can defeat Shikai Renji. Now in this state, Mask does seem to overpower Shikai Renji, and he sends him flying backwards, unable to even act against Mask's abilities. Renji, you see at one point, Kubo shows him clinging onto the wall, but even that isn't enough, and he goes flying backwards. It's important to note that the cheers Mask receives when he transforms into whatever that additional form is are the last ones he actually gets. At this point, as he pushes Shikai Renji back, he seems to get ahead of himself a bit, and he actually activates his holy form. While we don't have necessarily a concrete number for how powerful it is comparable to Bankai in many ways, so you have to assume that Mask is now 5 to 10 times stronger than he was already. So if we put that into the pluses again, it's like +20, which is starting to get a little bit unwieldy for my liking, but Mask uses Star Flash Supernova to obliterate Renji and finish him off. What he does succeed in doing is finish off James, and James is actually eradicated by Star Flash Supernova. Now, I don't think this was meant to mean that Mask lost any of his power. I think it was Kubo's subtle way of saying his days are now numbered, because he simply can't power himself up, but he also can't heal anymore, so he's probably going to die soon, and that does happen. Renji is forced to use Bankai here, and whether it was necessary or not is an interesting question. I think it probably was, just simply on the virtue of the fact that what tiny bit of the fight we see, Renji was getting thrown around like a ragdoll at this point, even if he didn't look to be too hurt. I think he used the Bankai to make sure that he could defeat Mask here and now. So now that Renji has used his Bankai, his new and complete Bankai, by the way, Soho Zabimaru, he should now be 5 to 10 times as strong as he was in Shikai, which was already apparently considerably stronger than Bankai Kensei. Now, Renji's new Bankai is obviously a point of contention. Is he going to be very good with it immediately off the bat because he already was quite skilled with Hihio Zabimaru, or because he's only just learnt the true name of his Zanpakuto, is he not going to be too great with it just yet? Personally, I think actually he is supposed to be pretty good with it already, A, because of the time he spent fighting Long Zabimaru, but also because he gained this from the inner sanctum of Ichibei Hyosabe's training, and I think that probably pushed him up even considerably more, and maybe he's already mastered this new form of his Bankai already, considering how quickly he just decimates Mask. And decimate Mask he does. The Bankai is only used for a single chapter, but in it Renji's able to break Mask's arm, fling him into a building, and then basically kill him in one hit with a new ability, Zaga Teppo. And so this is why the power levels in Bleach are completely just torn asunder in this fight. Every single Sternritter was commented as having Reiatsu equal to or slightly greater than a captain. And I think it's fair to say that people like the Schutzstoffel are definitely considerably more powerful than captains, 2 to 3 times the Reiatsu would be my guess anyway. But Master Masculine's supposed to be your average Sternritter, and yet apparently he's capable of completely decimating Bankai Kensei in a straight fight, and then he even pushes Shikai Renji to use Bankai. Shikai Renji already apparently being able to decimate someone who decimated a Bankai captain. So you see why it's difficult to contemplate exactly what happens to the power levels in this fight. So to talk about one of the questions I initially posed at the beginning of this video, which is how exactly does Mask's already pretty vague power actually work? Does James's cheering add a +1 to Mask continuously, and it builds on his power level exponentially, making him stronger and stronger and stronger? Or does the cheer kind of activate Mask's power, and then it comes back down again, and then the next cheer makes it go back up again, essentially meaning he is kind of like on a baseline level, but his power can spike when he needs it to. Now, to me, from the evidence we get in this fight, I actually think the former is more likely. I think Mask's power builds and builds and builds on itself every single time, but that does make him completely obscenely powerful, but worse, it makes Renji obscenely powerful. Because if Mask's power returned to a sort of baseline state after he had defeated Bankai Kensei and Rose, I could buy Renji completely decimating him like he does. But if Mask is already above a Bankai captain, the fact that Renji manhandles him like he does is really difficult to believe. And it means that Renji is 3 to 4 times the power roughly of a normal captain by the time he is in Bankai. So Renji's power levels go off the charts, and I really think that Kubo was mostly just doing this to give Renji a well-deserved win. Like, Renji had been beaten around pretty badly during the Arrancar arc, and now finally he just decimates a powerful Sternritter opponent, and I think people wanted to see that from him. It's also important to note that Renji never really displays this level of power again. We know he has a brief skirmish with Bazby, who I do believe to be probably slightly more powerful than Master Masculine, at least on the basis of their abilities and the potential they actually have. Renji and Bazby have a very brief altercation, but you don't really see anything come of it. Renji is in Bankai, but the two of them barely clash on screen. And then alongside Byakuya, Renji is able to absolutely beat down base form Gerard Valkyrie, only to get absolutely annihilated by Gerard once he activates his god size. So again, it's difficult to place Renji, although I think he's got to be the most powerful vice captain. No questions asked at this point. He is beyond captain level. He's got to be mid-tier captain, if not higher than that. Because I do think Kensei and Rose are probably on the lower end of the captain spectrum, and if I was to redo my captain ranking, which I probably will do at some point, they would be lower down on the list. Now, you might naturally want to compare Renji and Rukia, as they both come from the same Royal Realm training. However, their fights are not similar in the slightest, and Rukia's opponent makes it considerably more difficult to actually determine how powerful she became. Unlike Renji, who never seemed in any real danger of losing that fight, Rukia was actually about to lose the battle to Asnot because his fear managed to penetrate her heart, and she was about to lose her mind had it not been for Byakuya arriving at the last second to bail her out. Having said that, in a straight fight, Rukia now clearly does decimate Asnot as she does when she manages to block his fear and run rings around him, and the way her Bankai just obliterates his second holy form, pretty much with no questions asked. So they both are very, very powerful. However, I wouldn't put it past Renji actually being the stronger of the two, but he isn't the captain yet because obviously Byakuya is still around and he wants to surpass Byakuya. Whether he has done or not is difficult to say, but I would say personally probably not, because Byakuya gets his own Royal Realm training and becomes incredibly powerful himself. I do hope this video made some semblance of sense to you. Like I said, I'm not an expert when it comes to power levels, and I'm just giving my opinion based on what I read in the Bleach manga and my interpretation of what happens. I do think that based on the amount of cheering James gives to Mask, he becomes something like plus 10 the amount of power he had initially, but Renji just handles him with basically no trouble whatsoever. And what that means for Renji's power is absurd, and this is what I mean when I say this fight breaks the Bleach power scale. Whatever power leveling system you were using, I don't think this fight can really apply because it seems to be such an anomaly done for the sake of spectacle. And Mask obviously is a wrestler, that's his whole theming, so whether Kubo was trying to go for a sort of tag in, tag out theme with this fight with Kensei and Rose going down, but then Renji coming in to save the day against Mask, regardless of power levels, that's possibly what Kubo was going for, but I also do believe that he gave Renji a much needed power up and basically made him one of the most powerful Shinigami in the Soul Society, and I think that's absolutely fair. I think the fact that he decimates Mask is obviously a sign of him being way above average captain level at this point, but I don't think he's necessarily the most powerful by any stretch of the imagination, because he does still get handled pretty hard by Gerard, and he doesn't seem to make any real progress against Basby either. So again, with the limited amount of content we have, it's difficult to say for sure, but I just wanted to comment on how I thought this fight was unique in the way it seemed to just obliterate Bleach power scaling and make Renji some kind of godlike character, while also making Mask some kind of godlike character. But I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of Renji versus Mask Damascene. I'm sure we'll have more to talk about when we get to this fight as a Bleach battle analysis later on down the line. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this discussion video. Let me know how powerful you think Renji became. Where would you rank him among, especially the end of series Shinigami, the end of series captains? Who would you put as above him? And how do you think this fight with Mask should be interpreted? Is it a really serious indicator of how powerful Renji actually is? Or is it maybe just being played up for the sake of spectacle, this being a grudge match and all? But I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more. And until next time, guys, I'll catch you later. See you then.